The morning light of Varilith was not like sunlight on Earth. It came from twin stars, one golden, one pale blue, and when both shone together, the whole sky looked like liquid crystal. Ethan Cole stood on the balcony of his guest chamber, watching the glowing clouds drift past floating towers. The palace of the Valerian Empire was alive. Its walls pulsed softly, breathing energy from the world beneath. Everything shimmered as if built from light instead of stone. He had been there 3 days now. Each day he met scholars, generals, and council members. Some were friendly, others distant, but all looked at him with curiosity, a young human among ancient races. Still, one presence stood above them all, Empress Saralyn. She had invited him often to speak privately. Every time she seemed both calm and different. There was an emotion in her eyes that her counselors never saw. That morning, her messenger, a tall Valerian woman named Lyra, entered his room. "The Empress requests your company," she said with a graceful bow. Ethan smiled. "Of course. Lead the way." They walked through shining corridors where waterfalls flowed along the walls like liquid glass. The air smelled faintly of flowers that did not exist on Earth. When they reached the Royal Observatory, the Empress stood by a massive window that opened into space. The stars looked close enough to touch. She was dressed in silver robes that moved like light itself. "Good morning, Ambassador," she said softly. Ethan bowed slightly. "Good morning, Your Majesty." "You may call me Saralyn when we are alone," she said. "Titles grow heavy when no one is watching." Ethan hesitated, surprised. "All right." "Saralyn." She turned toward him, smiling faintly. "Better." For a moment, silence filled the chamber. The Empress seemed thoughtful. "Your people," she began, "live so fast. You rise, explore, and even fight, all within the time my people take to grow one generation. Tell me, what drives you?" Ethan thought for a moment. "We don't live long, so we try to make every year count. We dream, we build, and sometimes we fail. But we keep trying. That's what it means to be human." Saralyn looked out the window again. "Your words remind me of something I lost long ago." "What's that?" Ethan asked. "Wonder," she said softly. "When one rules for too long, eternity becomes heavy. Every sunrise feels the same." Ethan watched her closely. "Then maybe it's time you saw the galaxy through human eyes." She turned toward him again, curious. "And how does a human see it?" "As something to discover, not to control," he said with a gentle smile. "You can rule the stars, but you can't own their beauty." Her lips curved slightly. "Perhaps that is why your kind are so unpredictable." Later that day, Saralyn invited him to the Hall of Memories, a vast room filled with floating crystals. Each crystal showed scenes from the history of the Valerian Empire, ancient wars, coronations, discoveries, and peace treaties. As they walked between them, the Empress explained, "These are memories of our people. We keep them so we never forget where we came from." Ethan stopped in front of a crystal showing a young Saralyn taking the throne. Her eyes were full of fire, her voice strong. She looked so different from the calm ruler beside him. "You were younger there," Ethan said. She smiled faintly. "That was 1,000 years ago." He blinked. 1,000? "Yes, my kind lives long. We do not age as you do." Ethan tried to imagine living that long. "Doesn't it get lonely?" Her eyes softened. "Yes. Sometimes I forget what it feels like to laugh without reason, to speak without duty." Ethan looked around the glowing hall. "Maybe you just need a friend who doesn't care about your crown." The Empress turned to him, studying his face. For a moment her expression was unreadable. Then she said quietly, "Perhaps I have found one." As the days passed, Ethan's presence began to change the mood of the palace. He spoke with the servants, shared jokes with the guards, and told stories of Earth's history to young Valerian scholars. They admired his warmth, something rare among the cold perfection of their world. Saralyn often watched him from afar. She had seen countless ambassadors from other races, but none like him. He treated everyone as equal, not as subjects or rivals. One evening she found him in the royal gardens, sitting beside a fountain that sang like a harp. He was sketching something on a digital pad. "What are you drawing?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "The fountain. It looks alive." "It is," she said, sitting beside him. "It responds to emotion. If one feels joy, it sings softly. If one feels sadness, the water dims." He watched the light shimmer across the water. "Then it must be happy tonight." She looked at him, amused. "And why do you say that?" Because it's glowing brighter than before, he said. For a moment, the Empress was silent. Then she laughed, a light musical laugh that made even the stars outside seem to listen. Her laughter surprised her. It had been centuries since she had laughed freely. Ethan grinned. That's a sound the galaxy should hear more often. Saralyn shook her head, smiling. You are a strange creature, human. Strange is part of our charm, he said playfully. She looked at him for a long time, the smile still lingering on her lips. Her violet eyes shimmered softly. Indeed. But not everyone was pleased. In the shadows of the court, several noble advisors whispered among themselves. This human grows too close to Her Majesty, said Lord Arvin, a tall Valerian with cold eyes. He clouds her judgment with primitive emotions. Another nodded. Our people respect logic, not affection. If she listens to him, she may forget what makes her divine. Then perhaps we must remind her, Arvin said darkly. Rumors began to spread. Quiet, poisonous words about the Empress's fascination with a mortal, but Saralyn ignored them. She had faced greater storms. Still, part of her wondered why she cared so much about what one human thought. One night, she invited Ethan to the Sky Terrace, a balcony high above the palace where the stars looked close enough to touch. The cool wind brushed past as she spoke softly. My advisors think you are dangerous. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? I've barely touched a weapon since I got here. They mean your influence, she said. They fear what they do not understand. Ethan looked up at the stars. That happens everywhere, even on Earth. Sometimes people fear kindness because it reminds them of what they've lost. Saralyn studied his profile, the way his eyes reflected the twin stars. And what have you lost, Ethan? He was silent for a while. Then he said quietly, people I cared about. Some dreams. But I keep moving forward. It's what humans do best. Saralyn's voice softened. Perhaps that is your greatest strength. She looked away, trying to hide the warmth rising in her chest. You make me remember things I buried long ago. Good memories, I hope. Ethan asked gently. Her eyes met his. Yes, though they make my heart feel strange. He smiled. That's called being alive. For a long time they stood there in silence, watching the stars drift by. The galaxy stretched endlessly around them, yet the distance between them felt smaller than ever. The Empress, ruler of countless worlds, felt something she could not name. Something simple, human and beautiful. When Ethan turned to leave, she stopped him with a quiet voice. Ethan, she said softly, you once said your people build bridges, not walls. He nodded. I did. Then perhaps, she said with a gentle smile, you have built one here too, between our worlds. Ethan smiled back. I hope it's strong enough to last. Saralyn looked at him, her heart strangely unsteady. I believe it will. As he walked away, she stood alone under the stars, her silver robe fluttering in the night wind. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Empress of the Valerian Empire felt her heart beat faster, not from fear, not from duty, but from something far gentler. She whispered into the sky, what are you doing to me, human? And the stars, ancient and silent, shimmered brighter, as if they too understood the question. The great halls of the Valerian palace shone brighter than ever, but peace was growing thin in the galaxy. The Drevak Dominion, an old and proud empire known for its cruelty, had begun to move fleets near Valerian borders. Whispers of war spread through every world. The counselors spoke in fearful tones, and even the stars seemed dimmer. For the first time since his arrival, Ethan Cole felt the calm of Virolith turn heavy with worry. He stood on a high balcony watching the silver skies, when a shadow passed across the horizon. A massive warship moving like a dark cloud. Moments later, a royal guard approached him. Ambassador Cole, Her Majesty requests your presence in the war chamber. Ethan followed quickly. The war chamber was unlike any room he had seen before. A giant holographic map of the galaxy floated in the center, showing red lines where Drevak fleets moved. The Empress stood there in shining armor, her silver robe replaced by a dark battlesuit that glowed softly with golden energy. Around her stood admirals and strategists, their faces tense. Saralyn looked up as Ethan entered. Her eyes, calm yet fierce, met his. Ambassador, she said, the Drevak Dominion has declared war. They demand my throne and threaten to destroy Earth if I do not surrender. Ethan froze. Earth? She nodded slowly. They call it a warning. They know humans are under my protection. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then Ethan spoke firmly. Then they'll have to go through me first. Some of the Valerian officers looked surprised. One of them said coldly, "Human, you cannot fight them alone. Your fleet is small. Your technology is young." Ethan looked at the officer calmly. "Maybe, but humans have faced impossible odds before. We don't run from bullies when we outthink them." Sarah Lynn's lips curved slightly. "Outthink them," she repeated. "A simple word, but I believe you mean it." She turned to the room. "Send word to the Alliance worlds. We defend together. The age of fear ends now." Later that night, as the Empress prepared her command ship, Ethan joined her on the deck. The stars outside looked sharp and cold. "You should not be here, Ethan," she said quietly. "This war is not yours." Ethan shook his head. "You said the Dravak will attack Earth. That makes it mine." She looked at him, a strange light in her eyes. "You are brave, human. But bravery without caution leads to sorrow." He smiled faintly. "Then it's good I have you for caution." The Empress looked away, trying to hide her smile. "You speak as if we have known each other for years." "Maybe we have," he said softly. "In another life." Her heart trembled for a moment before she turned back to the stars. "Prepare yourself, Ethan Cole. The storm begins." The next day, fleets of silver and blue ships rose from Virolith's atmosphere, forming patterns like constellations. The Valerian navy was a sight of perfect beauty and power, curved hulls that moved like flowing light. Among them, a smaller group of human ships arrived from the Sol system. They were rougher, smaller, but bold, painted with the blue and white of Earth's flag. When the Empress's grand flagship Radiant Crown appeared, the two fleets saluted together. The sight filled the galaxy's news screens, a symbol of unity between an immortal queen and a mortal world. The war had begun. The Dravak Dominion struck first. Their ships were dark, jagged, and filled with red fire. They cut through outer colonies like a storm. Entire systems fell in days, but the Valerian fleet stood strong. Under Sarah Lynn's command, every movement was precise, every defense perfectly timed. Ethan watched from the command deck beside her. He was not a soldier by training, but he understood people, and sometimes that was what a war needed most. When the Dravak fleet tried to trick them with false signals, Ethan recognized the pattern. "They're pretending to retreat," he said quickly. "It's a lure. They'll jump behind us in 5 minutes." Sarah Lynn looked at him sharply. "Are you certain?" "Trust me." She did. Her voice rang across the command deck. "All ships, rotate formation Delta. Prepare rear shields." Moments later, enemy ships jumped exactly where Ethan predicted and met a wall of waiting Valerian fire. The explosion painted the stars in gold and red. The crew cheered. Even Sarah Lynn turned to him with quiet admiration. "How did you know?" Ethan grinned. "We humans are good at reading lies. Comes from dealing with politics." For a second she laughed. Even in the middle of battle, days turned into weeks. The war spread like wildfire, but wherever the Valerians and humans fought together, victory followed. Ethan worked beside the Empress, helping her understand human tactics. Fast, flexible, full of risk. She taught him patience and precision. Together they made an unbeatable pair. Between the battles they spoke of peace, not just war. They dreamed of a future where their worlds would stand as equals, not allies of necessity but of choice. Yet, in quiet moments, Sarah Lynn sometimes looked at him with a shadow in her eyes. She knew humans age quickly. For her, years were seconds. For him, time was fragile. She tried to bury those thoughts. But they returned, always when he smiled. Then came the Battle of the Crimson Nebula, the war's turning point. The Dravak brought their greatest fleet, thousands of warships led by their emperor himself. The nebula glowed blood red, hiding enemy movements in thick gas. Inside the Radiant Crown, Sarah Lynn stood in her command armor. Ethan stood beside her, checking data screens. "They're surrounding us," said one officer. Ethan looked at the map. "Good, let them. We'll use their pride against them." Sarah Lynn raised an eyebrow. "Explain." He pointed to the map. "They're focusing on your flagship. They'll close in to show power. But if we overload our shield emitters here and release energy at the right time," she caught on instantly, "it will explode outward in a wave of pure light. Enough to blind their targeting systems." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." Sarah Lynn looked into his eyes. It is dangerous, he smiled faintly. So is freedom. She hesitated, then gave the command. Do it. The plan worked perfectly. When the Dravak ships closed in, the radiant crown released a burst of energy brighter than a sun. The shockwave scattered enemy sensors. Valarian and human ships struck back with perfect aim. The battle lasted hours, but when the light cleared, the Dominion fleet was broken. Saralyn watched the enemy retreat. It is over, she said softly. Ethan, exhausted but smiling, said, Then maybe we've earned a little peace. After the victory, the fleets gathered near Virolith. Cheers echoed across systems. Songs were written about the human who outwitted the stars. But for the Empress, the victory was not about glory. She watched Ethan from her throne room as he laughed with soldiers and engineers. Something inside her had changed, something she could no longer hide. That night she invited him once again to the royal garden, the same place they had first spoken alone. The air smelled of soft starlight and blooming crystal flowers. You have done much for my people, she said quietly. More than anyone in 1,000 years, Ethan smiled. We just helped each other. That's what friends do. She looked at him for a long moment. Is that what we are, Ethan? Friends? Her voice was gentle, but her eyes held something deeper, a question she wasn't ready to ask. Ethan hesitated, then said softly, I don't know what word fits us, Saralyn. But whatever it is, it means a lot to me. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The stars shimmered above them, reflected in the silver pond. Saralyn's fingers brushed the edge of her robe nervously, a gesture no one had ever seen from the perfect, eternal Empress. You are unlike any being I have met, she whispered. You make me see my own world differently. Ethan's tone was warm. Then I think we've both learned something important. Saralyn looked at him, her heart racing quietly. Yes, she said softly, that even the smallest spark can change the stars. She turned her gaze upward. Across the dark sky, the last fires of war faded into peace, but inside her and the storm was only beginning. The war had ended, but peace did not come easily. The scars of battle still marked the skies of Valeria. Ships floated silently above the capital world, their lights flickering like tired stars. The grand city of Virolith, once full of music and color, was now quieter. People were rebuilding, repairing what was lost. But among them, something new had also begun to grow. Hope, Ethan Cole, the human ambassador, stood on the balcony of the royal palace. He watched the sunrise, its golden light spreading across the horizon. The air smelled of new life, like rain after a storm. Behind him, soft footsteps echoed. It is beautiful, isn't it? Came a calm voice. He turned and saw Empress Saralyn, dressed not in her shining royal armor, but in a simple silver robe. Her long hair shimmered faintly under the morning light. She looked tired but peaceful, her eyes gentle instead of fierce. Yes, Ethan said with a small smile. Your world has survived. That's something to be proud of. She walked closer, her gaze following the light across the city. It survived because of you. And your people, she said quietly. Humans are strange. You fight with small fleets and fragile ships, yet your hearts carry more courage than most empires I have seen. Ethan smiled, half shy, half proud. We don't always win by strength, Your Majesty. Sometimes we just refuse to give up. The Empress looked at him, a faint smile touching her lips. That refusal, it saved my world. There was a soft silence between them. The sound of wind moved through the tall glass towers below. Later that day, they walked through the Imperial Gardens, which were slowly being restored after the war. Flowers that glowed with soft blue light bloomed again. The trees, shaped like crystal arches, whispered with the wind. Ethan reached out and touched a vine that pulsed with life. Your gardens are alive, he said softly. They are part of the planet, Saralyn replied. Everything here connects to the same energy that sustains us. When the war came, even the gardens felt pain. But now they are healing, like us. Ethan nodded slowly. Earth isn't like this. But when I was a boy, I used to sit by a river near my home. I always felt like the water understood when I was sad or happy. Maybe that's how your world feels now. The Empress turned to look at him, her eyes thoughtful. You speak as if the universe listens. Maybe it does, he replied with a smile. She said nothing for a moment. Then she asked softly, Ethan, do you ever miss your world? Every day, he answered honestly. But sometimes I feel closer to it when I'm helping others. It's strange, I know. No, Saralyn said gently. It is not strange. It is human. As the days passed, they met often. They talked about everything: art, music, old human cities, forgotten Valerian myths. Sometimes they walked through the Great Hall of Stars, where floating lights showed the history of her empire. Other times they sat by the river near the palace and watched the small ships move across the sky. For the first time in centuries, Saralyn laughed. Her laughter was soft and warm, like light breaking through clouds, but not everyone was happy about their closeness. The Valerian Council began to whisper among themselves. Some believed the Empress was losing her judgment. Others feared the human influence would weaken the empire. One evening, as Saralyn stood in the council chamber, an elder advisor spoke boldly. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "you have shown kindness to the human, but our people grow uneasy. They fear you forget what you are." Saralyn's eyes glowed faintly, but her voice was calm. "And what am I, Elder?" He hesitated. "You are the eternal Empress chosen by the light of Valar. You are not meant to feel as mortals do." The Empress looked out the great window, where the twin moons shone over the city. "Perhaps that is the problem," she said softly. "I have forgotten what it means to feel." The hall went silent. None dared to answer her. That night, Saralyn went to the balcony where Ethan often stood. She found him there again, looking at the stars. The cool wind carried the scent of the sea far below. "You look like you are thinking deeply," she said, walking beside him. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. I was just wondering if stars ever get lonely." She tilted her head. "Why would they?" "They shine alone for billions of years," he said softly. "Even if they light up others, they never touch, I guess. Sometimes leaders are like that too." The Empress turned to him, her heart suddenly heavy. She had ruled for so long, surrounded by people yet alone inside. He had seen that truth so easily. She spoke after a moment of silence. "Ethan, when I first saw you, I thought humans were reckless, fragile, too emotional to survive the stars. But now," she paused, looking down at her hands. "Now I see something else." "What do you see?" he asked quietly. "I see strength born from feeling. I see courage that rises from love, not power." Her voice trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. Ethan didn't answer at first. He simply looked at her with the same honest eyes that had once spoken to her people about peace. "Sometimes," he said finally, "strength isn't about never falling. It's about choosing to stand up again. I think you've always had that." Saralyn looked at him for a long moment. Her golden eyes softened. The Empress of 1,000 worlds felt her heart beating faster, an emotion she had almost forgotten existed. The next evening, Saralyn called him to the royal gardens again. The sky was clear, painted with silver and violet light. The stars shimmered like distant fires. They walked silently until they reached the fountain he had repaired after the war. The water glowed gently, reflecting the night sky. She stopped, turning toward him. Her usual calm seemed uncertain. "Ethan," she said softly, "there is something I wish to ask." He nodded. "Of course, Your Majesty." She hesitated. For the ruler of empires, the one whose voice could command fleets and silence storms, it was strange how difficult words could become. Her heart raced in a way it never had before. She looked down, then up at him again, her voice trembling slightly. "Ethan, are you single?" The silence that followed was almost unreal. The wind paused, and even the fountain seemed to wait. Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. What?" he asked, half laughing. Saralyn's cheeks glowed faintly, like starlight on her pale skin. "I mean, I have never asked such a question before," she said quickly, her voice flustered but honest. "But I wish to understand you better. Your people say such things when they wish to know someone deeply, do they not?" Ethan smiled, his surprise fading into gentle warmth. "Yes, that's true," he said softly, "and yes, I am single." Her eyes widened slightly, and then she looked away, hiding the smallest smile. "I see," she murmured almost shyly. "That is good to know." For a moment, the great Empress of Valeria looked nothing like a ruler. She looked human, soft, uncertain, and full of quiet joy. Ethan chuckled lightly. "You're blushing." "I am not," she said quickly, though her glowing cheeks betrayed her. "Yes, you are," he teased gently. Saralyn laughed, a sound bright and pure. "You are impossible, human. And yet," he said with a grin, "you called me to your garden just to ask if I'm single." She sighed softly, though her eyes sparkled. "Perhaps I did." They stood together by the fountain, the water reflecting their faces side by side. Above them, the stars burned brighter as if the universe itself smiled at the sight. Saralyn whispered, "For so long I have ruled without feeling. I thought emotions made one weak, but now I see they make us real." Ethan looked at her gently. "Then maybe, Your Majesty, you're learning to be human." She smiled, her voice a soft promise. "Then maybe I could know what it means to be human." And as the wind carried her words into the night, the Empress of Valeria, the ruler of empires, the conqueror of stars, stood quietly beside the human who had taught her how to feel again. The stars stretched like silver threads across the darkness as the Earth diplomatic ship Horizon Dawn drifted quietly through the endless sea of space. Inside, Captain Ethan Cole stood near the observation deck, staring at the swirling blue nebula outside. He had seen many wonders during his years as a pilot, but what awaited him this time was something far beyond the usual trade talks or peace missions. For the first time in history, the Galactic Union had invited a human to the Royal Gathering of Sovereigns, an event where leaders of hundreds of alien civilizations met once every century. The invitation was shocking enough, but what surprised everyone even more was the personal message attached at the end. It was signed by none other than Her Majesty Queen Seraphis of the Astral Dominion, one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The message was short, elegant, and mysterious. "Captain Ethan Cole of Earth, I have questions only a human can answer. Attend the gathering. You will be honored and tested." Ethan had read that message at least 100 times, trying to understand what the Queen meant. What kind of questions could a galactic monarch possibly want to ask a simple human pilot? As Horizon Dawn approached the Astral Dominion's capital world, Aurelia, Ethan felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The planet was unlike anything he had ever seen. Shining rings of golden light surrounded it, and its surface was covered in glittering crystal cities that reflected the light of nearby stars. Even from orbit, the beauty of Aurelia felt unreal, like a dream painted across the universe. "Captain," said Lieutenant Mara, his second in command, stepping beside him, "we've received docking clearance. The royal escort will meet you at the palace gates." Ethan nodded. "Understood. Keep the engines ready." "I don't know how long this visit will last." Mara smiled nervously. "Sir, try not to start an intergalactic incident. Last time you called an ambassador's robe a fancy blanket?" He chuckled. "I'll behave this time. I promise." A few hours later, Ethan stood before the celestial palace of the Astral Dominion, a towering structure made of translucent crystal that shimmered with every color imaginable. The air around it was filled with soft music, as if the wind itself sang in honor of its queen. Guards with silver armor bowed silently as Ethan walked past them, guided by an elegant attendant whose skin glowed, faintly like starlight. "Her Majesty awaits you in the Hall of Crowns," the attendant said, softly. Ethan followed through massive doors that opened without a sound. Inside, the hall was vast. Pillars taller than skyscrapers rose into the glowing ceiling, and hundreds of alien delegates stood in silence watching him. Some had wings, others tentacles, and a few floated gently above the ground. But all of them turned as the human entered, their eyes full of curiosity. Then the voice came, calm, graceful, and powerful. "Welcome, human of Earth." Ethan turned toward the golden throne at the far end of the hall. There she sat, Queen Seraphis, radiant and impossibly beautiful, with hair that shimmered like liquid silver and eyes that reflected galaxies. Her presence was both gentle and overwhelming, like standing in the light of 1,000 suns and still feeling peace. He bowed respectfully. "Your Majesty, it's an honor to meet you." Seraphis smiled faintly. "Rise, Captain Ethan Cole. Humanity has traveled far in a short time. Few species have achieved so much without divine guidance." "You intrigue us." Ethan stood up slowly, unsure how to respond. "We just do our best, Your Majesty." The Queen tilted her head slightly as if studying him. "You are humble, that is unexpected." There was a murmur among the alien nobles, whispers in languages Ethan couldn't understand. Some seemed impressed, others doubtful. The Queen raised her hand and silence returned instantly. "Tell me, human," she said softly, her gaze locked on him. "Why do your people strive so hard? You build, you explore, you fight the impossible. What drives you to reach beyond the stars?" Ethan paused. That was not the kind of question he had prepared for. He had expected political talks, maybe trade discussions, but this felt deeply personal. He took a breath. Because, Your Majesty, we always want to see what's next. We've fallen, failed, and broken countless times, but every time we stand up again. Maybe that's what humans do best. We keep trying no matter how far the stars are. The hall went silent. Even the music in the air seemed to pause. Queen Seraphis leaned forward slightly, her silver eyes glowing with a strange light. Interesting, she whispered. You speak of endurance, not conquest. Most species crave power. Humans crave meaning. She stood from her throne, and the entire court bowed instantly. Ethan didn't move, unsure if he should, but the queen gestured for him to stay upright. She stepped closer, her presence like the warmth of a star. You are not what I expected, human. Perhaps that is why I summoned you. Ethan blinked. Summoned me? For what purpose, Your Majesty? Her smile widened, graceful but mysterious. To answer a question that no one in this galaxy could answer. The air felt heavier. Every eye in the room turned toward them. Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Finally, the queen spoke, her tone suddenly playful, almost curious. Tell me, human, are you single? The hall froze. Ethan stared, certain he had misheard her. Some of the alien nobles exchanged glances, confused. A few gasped. Even the guards seemed unsure if this was part of the ceremony. Excuse me? Ethan managed to say after a long silence. The queen looked at him with calm amusement. You heard me correctly. Are you single? Ethan blinked rapidly. Yes? I suppose I am. But, why is that important? The queen's smile deepened. Because, Captain, your world may not realize it yet. But a great alliance can begin with a single bond. And perhaps a single question. The hall erupted in whispers. Some laughed softly. Others looked shocked. Ethan stood frozen, unsure if this was diplomacy, humor, or some kind of test. Your Majesty, he said carefully. I'm not sure I understand. Seraphis's eyes glimmered like stars. You will, human. In time. After the ceremony, Ethan was escorted to his guest chamber, still trying to process what had happened. The room was luxurious, filled with soft light and floating crystals that played gentle melodies. But no amount of comfort could calm the storm of thoughts in his head. Was the queen serious? Was it a joke? Or was it something deeper? He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the galaxy beyond the window. What does she really want from me? He murmured. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. A small holographic sphere floated near the door, glowing with golden light. Captain Cole, said a gentle voice. It was the Queen's attendant. Her Majesty has requested your presence tomorrow at dawn. She wishes to speak with you privately. Ethan sighed. Of course she does. He looked out at the stars again. Somewhere out there, millions of species were watching, waiting, and wondering what this human would do next. And for the first time in his career, Captain Ethan Cole realized something important. Diplomacy in space wasn't just about treaties and politics. Sometimes, it started with the most unexpected question in the universe. Are you single, human? The twin suns rose slowly over Valeria, painting the royal city of Virolith with golden light. The world was healing, and for the first time in centuries there was true peace across the empire. The banners of unity, half human blue, half Valerian silver, fluttered across the towers. Ships from both civilizations crossed the skies together, carrying trade, aid, and friendship. Inside the royal palace, the great halls were filled with quiet work. Artists rebuilt the mosaics, scholars restored old knowledge, and children from both races played in the shining courtyards. The empire had begun a new era, one born not from war or fear, but from hope. Ethan Cole, now honored as the first human counselor to the Valerian throne, stood before a massive window overlooking the city. His uniform was simple, a mix of Earth and Valerian design. Behind him, a soft chime sounded. He turned and saw her, the Empress Saralyn, dressed in a flowing robe of white and gold. Good morning. Ethan, she said gently, her voice calm yet warm. Good morning, Your Majesty, he replied with a small bow. She smiled faintly. You have stopped calling me Your Majesty many times before. Why so formal today? He smiled back. Maybe I just wanted to remember who you are. It's easy to forget that the person standing beside me once ruled 1,000 worlds. Saralyn laughed softly. And it's easy for me to forget that the person who stood beside me once came from a single small blue world. They both smiled at the thought, Over the next months, Ethan and Saralyn worked side by side. Together, they rebuilt alliances and created the Council of Harmony, where humans and Valerians sat as equals for the first time in history. It was not always easy. Some old minds resisted change. Others doubted the unity. But the Empress's calm leadership and Ethan's honest words changed hearts slowly. At one meeting, a Valerian elder asked sharply, "Why should we trust humanity? Their lives are short. Their tempers unpredictable." Ethan stood and answered, his voice steady. "Because short lives make us value every moment. Because unpredictability makes us grow. We may not live long, but we live fully, and that's what makes us strong." The room went silent. Even the elder had no reply. Saralyn smiled quietly from her throne, pride shining in her eyes. Later, when the meeting ended, she said to him privately, "You speak like a ruler." He chuckled. "No, I just speak like a human who believes in second chances." She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Then perhaps that is what the galaxy needs, someone who believes again." One evening, the Empress invited him to the Hall of Lights, the place where her ancestors' memories were kept. The walls shimmered with living crystals that stored visions of the past, wars, victories, discoveries. "Every Empress adds one memory," she explained softly as they walked. "A moment to be remembered forever." Ethan looked at the glowing walls. "And what will you add?" She turned to him, her golden eyes calm. "Not a battle. Not a crown. I will add a moment of peace, the day we ended the war." She touched a crystal sphere, and light poured from it, forming an image of the battle's end. Valerian and human ships flying together, their lights merging like stars. Ethan stood beside her, watching in silence. "It's beautiful," he said finally. Saralyn looked at him. "It is only beautiful because we chose peace, not power." He nodded slowly. "Then I hope your people remember that forever." Her gaze softened. "They will. Because of you." As time passed, stories about the human ambassador and the Star Empress spread through both civilizations. Poets wrote songs about them, artists painted their likenesses, and children dreamed of exploring the stars together. But even as joy grew, Saralyn carried quiet thoughts within her. Immortal and timeless, she had seen generations fade away. Now, for the first time, she feared that one day Ethan would fade too, and she would remain. One night, under the silver moonlight of Valeria, she sat in her garden, lost in thought. The stars reflected in the still water of the fountain, the same one Ethan had repaired long ago. She did not hear his footsteps until he spoke softly behind her. "You're thinking again," he said gently. She smiled faintly without turning. "You always seem to know when I am." "Maybe I just know you," he replied, sitting beside her. For a while, neither spoke. The sound of wind and soft water filled the silence. Finally, she asked, "Ethan, what will you do when your time on this world is over?" He looked up at the stars. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe I'll become part of them. Maybe I'll shine for a little while longer." Her heart ached quietly. "I wish you could stay longer." He smiled softly. "Maybe I don't need to. Maybe staying isn't the same as leaving something behind. You've taught me that." Saralyn turned to look at him, her eyes shining faintly. "You always find peace in endings." He shook his head gently. "No, I just find meaning in them." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she reached out and took his hand. Her touch was cool yet warm inside. "Then I will make sure your meaning lives forever," she whispered. Months later, the Empress made an announcement that surprised every world under her rule. She declared a new age, the Age of Harmony, where no species would stand above another. The Empire was to become a union, not a hierarchy. During the grand ceremony, hundreds of worlds tuned in through shimmering screens of light. The Empress stood tall on the balcony of her palace, wearing a crown of silver leaves instead of gold. Ethan stood beside her, calm but humble. Once, Saralyn said in her clear, powerful voice, "Our empires rose and fell in endless cycles of power. We believed strength was born from fear. But now, I have learned something greater. Strength is born from trust, from compassion, from hearts that beat together, no matter the world they come from." The crowd below cheered. Across distant planets, humans and Valerians alike celebrated. She continued, "Let this day mark the beginning of something new. The Age of Harmony begins, not with a conquest, but with understanding. When she finished, she looked at Ethan. For a brief moment, all protocol disappeared. They smiled at each other, not as Empress and Ambassador, but as two souls who had changed galaxies with nothing more than kindness and courage. Later that night, when the celebrations quieted, Saralyn sat in her private chamber. The air was peaceful, filled with faint music from the distant city. She opened a crystal tablet and began to record her thoughts, a tradition of the Empresses before her. Her voice was soft but steady as she spoke. For ages I ruled in silence. I commanded armies, decided the fate of countless worlds, yet I never truly lived. Then came one human, a man who carried no power, no armies, only his heart. He showed me that strength does not come from fear, but from kindness. That love is not weakness, but the greatest courage of all. She paused, looking out the window at the stars. Somewhere among them, Earth shone faintly. I ruled empires without fear, yet my heart trembled when a human smiled, and from that trembling a new era was born. She ended the record with a soft sigh and closed the tablet. Years later, Ethan and Saralyn continued to travel across the stars. They visited new worlds, shared knowledge, and brought peace where there had once been hate. Wherever they went, people whispered the same words, the human and the Empress, the ones who changed the galaxy. And though time moved on, and humans lived their short, bright lives, the bond they had formed became a legend told for generations. Children of both species looked to the night sky and believed that no distance, no difference could keep hearts apart. In the quiet of space, the flagship Aurora star drifted between galaxies. Inside, Saralyn stood at the viewing deck watching a sea of stars. Ethan joined her, carrying 2 cups of warm tea. "Still working, Your Majesty?" he teased lightly. She smiled softly. "Always. The stars never rest." He handed her a cup and stood beside her. "Then maybe they just need someone to watch over them." She looked at him, her eyes bright. "And maybe they already have someone." Together they watched the endless stars, silent but content. The galaxy stretched before them, vast, mysterious, and full of life. And for the first time, neither the immortal ruler nor the short-lived human felt alone. Because some lights once found never fade,